It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
Hi, and welcome to the show. Today, my guest is Cynthia Coufal. Cynthia is a teen anxiety coach. She has a podcast and a YouTube channel called The Teen Anxiety Maze. Cynthia spent 31 years as a teacher and school counselor in public schools. She started a podcast during the pandemic to reach her students since she couldn't see them face to face. This led to her wanting to have a broader audience than just the students in her school building. Cynthia now has clients around the U.S. and listeners all over the world. Cynthia is UMAP assessment certified. She uses the profile to help young people understand what their strengths, values, preferred skills, and interests are. This helps them find their why for tackling anxiety. Okay, let's get to the interview now with Cynthia on today's edition of Success is Subjective. Well, Cynthia, I'm really excited to have you as a guest on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm super excited. Okay, so let's just jump right in because we've talked briefly before and I know like a snippet of your story. So I'm actually excited to hear a lot more. But let's start with actually you giving a little bit of backstory. Like where were you raised and what was the messaging that you were hearing about what you were supposed to be doing after high school?
I love that. I grew up on a farm in Kansas. I still live in Kansas, but I do not live on a farm. I hated it from the minute I was born. Like I kept telling my parents, I'm not supposed to be here. And they're like, well, this is where we live. And I'm like, well, I don't like it. So I fought that all through growing up. And really, I am super surprised that I went to college and got a master's degree because neither of my parents went to anything after high school. Actually, my dad, it was in the 40s because my parents are a lot older than other parents of people my age. But my dad left high school when he was a junior and went to join the Navy. And then he finished his high school while he was in the Navy. And my mom finished high school, but they didn't do anything else. And then living on a farm, like that is work and that's a job. And that's what they were doing. And I was like, there's no way I'm doing this. And maybe that was the catalyst for me to go to college. But I remember as far back as I can think of, I told myself I'm going to college. My parents didn't say to go to college. They could have cared less if I went to college. My classmates, because it was a rural community, especially being a girl, we weren't expected to go to college. And actually, I remember our school counselor telling a lot of us that we shouldn't bother to go. It's really weird that I was just like so adamant that I was doing it. But I went. I wasn't super successful in the first attempt of that because there were 47 kids in my graduating class that I had been with in the same small town forever. And then I went to the state university. Well, we have two state universities, but I went to K-State and, there's thousands of people there. And I was not prepared for that. And I had gotten a boyfriend that summer before I went away to college and he was staying in my hometown. So I was just going home all the time and I was obsessed with him as my boyfriend. And I just dropped out in October of that first semester that I went to college. And I didn't tell my parents when I went home. Like I just left. I didn't even tell my friend. One girl from my class went to college with me and she was on a different floor than I was. And I just packed up all my stuff and I just left. And she still tells me, about how hurt she was when she went down to my dorm room and opened the door and there's nothing there. And I didn't want to deal with people telling me that I shouldn't leave or that, whatever. And so I went to live with my boyfriend because he was 9 years older than me. So he had an apartment. And so I went to live with him in my hometown, but I just didn't tell my parents. So they thought I'm at school and I'm really in town living with this guy. But I still knew that I wanted to go to school. And so I thought, okay, how can I go to school and live with my boyfriend at the same time? Because I want both of these things and I've got to figure it out. So there was a community college about 30 miles away. So I just decided, I enrolled for that January session, and I went there and drove there every day and just came to his house every night because I just wanted to be with him so bad. And I finished college. The community college, of course, was only 2 years. And then there was a 4-year college about 50 miles from me. So I drove to it until I finished my bachelor's degree. And in that time, I married him. And the semester before I graduated, I had our daughter and still kept going. And then when she turned 2, I went back to get my master's degree. And it took me 5 years to do it. And so I'm surprised that I did all of that, but I'm so glad I did. I was a school counselor and I loved it every years that I did it. And I retired 2 summers ago with 31 years of public education.
Whoa. I feel like there are so many things that you just shared that I'm like, oh my gosh, I want more information about that. That is just fascinating. I think the biggest takeaway that I have in the experience that you had, right? You said, I wanted this college degree, but I also really wanted to live with my boyfriend. So like, how do I make these work? To me, it just sounds like you were so driven, but yet life was happening, right? Like you're having a kid and you're like, and I'm still going to get this degree. Not only am I going to finish my bachelor's, I'm going to get my master's. Like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, I am glad I had that determination. The only thing I can think of, I mean, my parents are nice people and they're driven and determined in their, I guess, entrepreneurship of farming. And, my mom stayed home and did, all the stuff you got to do at home, like gardening. And my dad had hired men that worked on the farm. And so my mom cooked all the meals for them and all that stuff. And so they were very determined in their own way, just not like towards education. And they weren't against education, of course, but it was just like this, well, if you go, you go. And if you don't, you don't. And, we don't really care. They knew I wasn't going to stay on the farm. So it wasn't like, well, you need to stay on this farm to do this work, because I would have been a terrible farmer anyway.
You'd made that abundantly clear. This is not for me.
Yes, I had told them, I think since I was a baby, that I wasn't supposed to be there. So, my dad had no illusions that I was going to stay there and do any of that. But yeah, I'm glad I had that determination to do that. And those were obstacles, and luckily my parents they were mad at me when they found out that I had dropped out of school because they were paying this bill and no one was there. And they found out probably by November that I wasn't there anymore. And luckily they didn't say, well, you're done and we're out. They continued to pay for my school because they did want me to do something. And so they were like, well, if you're going to go, we'll still pay for it. So luckily I had parents like that, stuck with me, even though I was doing it the wrong way or what they considered to be the wrong way. And it certainly wasn't the natural way of going about school, but it worked for me. And I really do think those experiences, because I was kind of a rebel growing up, I got in a lot of trouble. I was always somebody that just wanted to try everything and do everything. And I think that helped me be a great school counselor, because there would be kids that would come to me with all this craziness that other adults were freaked out about. And I'd be like, oh, it's totally fine. I just, just let me talk to them. We'll get it figured out. And I had many students that, they grew up and they became successful people in the world. And it is scary as a parent to see something like that. And then I also had this boyfriend that I lived with that I then married. He had a son that lived with him. So when I moved in, when I was just 18 years old, to his house, he had a 2.5-year-old. And I raised him because his mom wasn't in the picture. And when he was in high school, he was a handful and didn't want to stay in school and he didn't want to do things. And, I was like, oh my gosh, she's going to be a homeless person or whatever. And he didn't. I just kept working with him and talking to him. And I wanted him to do more, but it just wasn't what he wanted to do. And I had to stop thinking that my idea of what is successful and what is good is everyone else's idea. Just like my parents had to, I'm sure, come to grips of, our daughter's doing this the different way and we don't like it, but it is working and it is what she wants it to be. And I had to get to that same realization with my son that, okay, he's not going to go on. He did go to a heavy equipment school for like 9 months after high school, but otherwise, and he still does heavy equipment to this day. And he's a foreman and he makes more money than I've ever made in a year in my life. So, he is successful, even though I wouldn't want to do heavy equipment. I don't want to work outdoors, but he does, and he likes it. So I had to get over what I think is the right way. My parents had to get over what they think is the right way. And when it was everyone else's kid, when I was a school counselor, I was totally open with them about, how do you want to do it? What do you want it to look like? And let's make that happen. And I think that is helpful when kids are trying to figure that out.
Well, and I imagine over a 31-year career, you probably saw trends or like the evolution of who is showing up in the school system, how parents are directing or are involved or not involved or whatever that looks like over the years. And so obviously, I do want to talk about what it is that you're doing now because
Yes.
I'm really excited about it. But one quick question, if you're okay, like right before you retired, what were you seeing? Like, what was the biggest shift in some of the students that you were working with?
I think, the pandemic did, play a number on all the young people. And I retired after we'd finally gone back to regular school. Like we quit, we didn't have school. Then we came back for a whole year on hybrid. And then I had a regular year again before I retired. So I got to see like before and after of that. And I think they realized that school could be done differently. And a lot of them didn't come back because, I can get my credits at home. And I don't have to go to a brick and mortar school to get my credits. Now, online education was available before that, but most kids didn't know that they could ask for it or that it was available because their parents didn't want them to do it. And some kids shouldn't have done it. Oh my goodness. Some of the people that chose to do hybrid, and I know that there was a lot of scariness about the disease, but some kids chose hybrid when we offered it because they didn't want to come to school, not because it would be good for them. And so some just didn't do any work at all. And then once you get so lost from, like you're so out of touch with what's going on in school and you haven't done schoolwork for 6 months, a year, some of them disappeared and we didn't know where they were. And some of them they just decided to quit because it was too hard. So that part was difficult to see. And then as far as like other kinds of trends, like parents, and I think some of it has to do with, I worked in some rural schools and I also worked in some urban schools. And there is a difference between parents in an urban setting versus a rural setting. There's just different expectations. And I experienced that with my own parents. Like they're not educated. And, in a rural community, there's a lot of like, our farm is here. We don't move because your land doesn't move. And this is what we do. And we want you to stay here and do this work, or, we can't, whatever else. But and girls were not expected to do a whole lot, like other than work in a garden or maybe be a secretary or maybe be a teacher. And maybe I chose education because in my head it was like, there's not a lot of options here or something. I don't know, but I'm glad I did because it was good for me. And then when my last 14 years, I was in an urban, one of the biggest high schools in Kansas with parents that wanted their kids to go to Harvard and Yale. And so that's a whole different expectation. And I saw parents doing so much of the work for their kids because they didn't want them to have any adversity or problems or challenges. Let's just help. And then their kid doesn't know how to do anything when they leave the home, and they, sometimes fail out of college because they never learned. Sometimes things are hard, and sometimes you have to do certain things that are challenging, and they'd never had a challenge before. And their parents fight the challenges. Like if you say, well, they need to fail this class, or, they're going to, I don't know, have this attendance mark against them or whatever. They're like, no, we can't have any of this. This can't happen. Well, this is the way the world is. And sometimes we in education fell into that too. Like, well, these parents are so vocal, we'll just let them have what they want so that we can move on with our lives. But it wasn't helping kids.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Okay.
Yeah.
So segue to now, maybe that's a part of like the decision to retire, and then obviously do the work that you're doing now. So fill us in. What are you doing?
Okay. Well, I am a teen anxiety coach, and teen and young person anxiety coach. I have some young adults in college, and I love it. And I originally started, so probably 6 years ago, I was life coached myself. Like I found life coaching, and I was getting so much benefit from it. It was changing my life. And as I was going through it for my own personal goals, I was like, oh my gosh, if I would have known this when I was 14, 15 years old, my life would be so different, and not really in a bad way, because my life has not been bad. But I maybe would be further along in other careers or doing other things, or I wouldn't have beat myself up for almost 50 years about what a bad person I was for some reason, when there was just so much I learned in that life coaching. Even though I should have learned it in school counseling, I did not. I learned it in the life coaching realm. And the person that was teaching so much in a podcast to me, I mean, like I never met this person in real life, but I learned so much from her podcast, and she had a life coach certification school. And I was like, I'm very interested in this. I want to know more. And at that time I was like, I'm going to use this in my office at school. And I did a lot. And it was life-changing for some of these kids. And then once I got the certification, everyone in my certification class was an entrepreneur, and they were going to do this as a job, not working for anyone else. And I loved being a school counselor. There was never a day in all of those years that I didn't want to go to work. And I didn't hardly ever miss work because I loved it so much. But I thought, how many more kids can I help if I get out of this building? And I have a podcast, and I have a YouTube channel, and I just work with kids wherever they are that need this. And so and I got really excited about, it was like graduating from high school for the first time. I was like, I have all these opportunities in front of me, and I can just do any of them, and I can create whatever I want to. And it got so exciting that as soon as I hit my 85 points, which in Kansas, and I'm sure other states have like some sort of a retirement system, but your age and your years of experience had to equal 85. And when I hit 85, I'm like, I am moving on to creating this business that I have. So there was just no turning back. Like, I was sad about leaving the job because I loved it so much, but I was like, there's so much more to do in this world. And so it's just like, this is the second half of my life now, and I'm ready to just do everything.
Well, and we'll make sure that we have all of the links to everything in the show notes, so people can connect with you if they want direct coaching, or to listen to the podcast, or to check out the YouTube channel. All of that's fascinating. And I resonate with your experience in the sense of like having worked for one single institution and being limited to supporting who it is that you have the ability to connect with just based on them literally being under this roof. Right. But then the second you step into that entrepreneurial space, now it's like the world is your oyster, right? There's so many more people that you can connect with. So I just very much am empathic to that decision that you made, because that was very similar to mine. But now I have to ask this very pointed question. Now that we've heard your emerging adult year experience leading to where it is that you are now, do you see yourself as successful?
I do. There's certainly more success to come. And my I don't know, like my benchmark is higher than where I am, but I still feel successful. I feel like my whole life has been a success. I don't feel like there was ever a time when it wasn't successful. And I think that's just because well, positivity is my number one strength. So I'm a Pollyanna. I'm always like, oh, everything's so great. And I suppose sometimes it's not as great as I like to make it out to be, but I do feel successful. And I know that I have known ever since I decided to do this business that it would be a success as well. And I'm still working to make it more successful, but it is a success.
If you could give one piece of advice, I'm actually going to make this twofold.
Okay.
So just bear with me. If you could give one piece of advice to an 18-year-old Cynthia that is out into the world right now, what advice would you give her? And then on the flip side, if you were speaking to a parent of an 18-year-old Cynthia right now, what would you share? And I ask those questions too, knowing that throughout this interview, you've really infused a lot of kind of advice and guidance along the way. But if there's anything that you would add to, what would you add?
One thing that I say to all my teen and young people is that there's nothing wrong with you. I feel like I always thought something was wrong with me because I wasn't like this person or that person, or I didn't have this talent or this skill, and I don't know where all of that came from. I think we all have a little voice in our brain that tells us we're not good enough, or, something's wrong or whatever. But I really was mean to myself. And so I talk to kids a lot about, yes, it feels like, oh, this person's more popular than you, or this person's cuter, or this person's more athletic, or whatever. But we come to this world with all the stuff that we need. We just are learning on how to unpack it, how to find it, how to bring it out to be successful, or to put it into a career that will really be fulfilling for us. And it's not going to look like anyone else's. And we get to create that. And to me, that's so freeing. It was freeing for me when I decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur after never caring about business a minute in my life. And because I kept thinking, I get to create this however I want. And I never had that permission before. And I want them to know that they have the permission to create any life they want to, and that they have the things that they're supposed to be doing in this world. They were given, like, this is part of their journey, and they just need to look inside and find those things. And your strength, I got a lot of flack for being so positive all the time. Like, people think it's weird, or they're like, you're naive, or I don't know. There was other probably meaner words that people said about my positivity, but it is a gift. And I feel like I'm so glad I was blessed with it. And it has helped me to stay on track for what I'm supposed to be doing, which is working with all these young people. So for kids, I think it is, you can create whatever you want. And that it's inside of you. You just need to find it. For parents, I want them to just calm down a little bit and not worry so much about what is this end result that they want their kid to have. Because I think that as long as they're mostly on the right track, I mean, if they have really, they're abusing alcohol and drugs, or have really difficult mental health diagnoses or something, there's a lot of stuff that they'll have to work through there. But for the most part, if a kid is just kind of what their parent sees as lazy, not doing the things they're supposed to be doing, or what the parent thinks they're supposed to be doing, they're going to figure it out. People don't want to be homeless. They don't want to be they don't want to not have people respect them, or, have some mission or purpose in life. Everybody wants that, but sometimes people give up because there's so much pressure on all these sides, and they just get overwhelmed. They're just like, well, forget it. I don't even know how to make this happen. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, the parents are part of that pressure, that you got to do this, you got to go here, you got to have this grade point average, you got to do, all these things. And yes, those things, our kids should care about that to some extent, but we also need to be nurturing them and giving them this open, safe place to explore things, whether they're actual activities they're exploring, or thoughts or ideas that they're exploring, and not just shut them down and say, oh, that's stupid, or don't do that, or this doesn't make sense. When my daughter went to college, the parents had a meeting on their own while the kids were in their meeting, like picking their classes or whatever. And the people said to us, and I'll never forget this because it kind of freaked me out. They said, no matter what major your kid comes back and tells you they chose, it's fine. If they said that they chose German as a major, it's fine. If they said that they chose dance as a major, it's fine. And I thought, oh no, it's not fine, because, she has to do stuff in her life, and she has to make money, and she has to pay her bills. And, if somebody's picking German or, whatever, we think, oh no, now they can't do whatever. And she didn't pick dance, but she had dance as her minor. And I remember thinking, well, what in the world are you going to do with dance? Like, it might be fun, but that's not a job. And I had to get to the point, and she ended up being in education just like me, and she was a school counselor too. But I had to allow her to explore it. I had to allow her she's going to figure it out. She wanted to be successful in her life. She wanted to make money. She wanted to pay her bills. And if she really wanted to pay her bills by dancing, she would have figured it out. But she, didn't want to work that hard, and she found out she didn't want to work that hard, and she moved and did something else. So I just think we need to allow them to make some of these, what we're seeing as mistakes, but they're just learning opportunities for them. And they have to have challenging things, and they have to be confused about stuff. And we're there to love them and problem solve it if they ask us to, but not to do it for them. And when things are hard for them, talk to them about how they can go forward into that hard thing. And that's our job as parents.
I love all of that. Well, Cynthia, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. Like I said earlier, all links for podcasts, YouTube, contact will be in the show notes, so definitely reach out. And thank you again for not just being a guest, but for sharing your story from your own journey and also from the parent perspective, because I feel like you were able to really shed light on both lenses, which is really, I love when I have a guest that can do that. So thank you again.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guest for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email joanna@lilleyconsulting.com. Be sure to check out the lilleyconsulting.com website for additional resources outside of podcasting. Now, if you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps, such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Thanks again for listening in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.
Do you have a teenager or young adult who seems to have lost their way? Maybe they need help navigating adolescence, adulthood, and decisions surrounding higher education. Or maybe they have become withdrawn, their grades are slipping, or they are flat out living a reckless lifestyle, and you're concerned about their health and well-being. If this describes what your teen or young adult is facing, a therapeutic consultant may be able to help. Mental health, addiction recovery, and higher education can all be equally expensive. While information is everywhere, how do you know what option is the best one for your family? Some parents have the time to research and navigate this on their own. Some don't. If the latter applies to you, enter Therapeutic Consultants. Therapeutic consultants, like Joanna, listen to your family's specific needs and advocate on behalf of your loved one. TCs will research therapeutic resources, recommend treatment programs, and assist during adulthood transitions. Not being affiliated with any program, their support is completely objective and catered toward the best interest of each unique family. To find a qualified therapeutic consultant to work with, check out TCA, also known as the Therapeutic Consulting Association. Their website is therapeuticconsulting.org, all one word. Again, that's therapeuticconsulting.org. Then click the Find a Pro tab up at the top.